Andrea, I'm so glad we identified the 1 hour of your day when you weren't working and you were able to join us tonight. I know you join us tonight with new reporting on how this all went down over these past few days.
Well, key, Brian, to it, according to a person familiar with the diplomacy behind the scenes, key to it was a recognition immediately by the White House, of course, led by the president, with all of his experiences, former chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee and vice president, critical issue, vice president in those 8 years, that they believed Israel was intent on invading Gaza. And if that were to happen, it would be a repeat of what happened in 2014, as Kelly just observed. It would be a long, protracted engagement, a really long conflict. They wanted to avoid that at all costs. They knew once the rockets came in from Hamas that Israel would retaliate and were poised for a ground invasion. They felt very strongly that it had to be done behind the scenes, that if they put Bibi Netanyahu on the spot, that it would backfire. It would not only hurt their long-term relationship, diplomatic relations with Israel, but it would be counterproductive. So they did it very, very quietly. They endured a lot of criticism. I reported a lot of it because it was coming from their allies on the Hill. Israel was very aware that they were losing moderate Democrats, allies who had been long supporters of Israel, with calls for an immediate ceasefire. But they deliberately took the heat, didn't call for an immediate ceasefire, and ratcheted it up as gradually they found that Egypt was the key ingredient. Egypt was the only one that could really influence Hamas. And they had to find out whether Egypt could actually influence Hamas, and they realized that once Egypt had promised that they could stop the long-range rockets from reaching Tel Aviv, which was such a red line for the Israelis. And once they got those long-range rockets to stop about 4 days ago, they figured that this might work. That's when they ratcheted up the pressure. And, of course, yesterday was a key call. There were 6 calls in all with Netanyahu, and that call yesterday where it seemed as though Netanyahu was rebuffing the president's call for a substantial evidence that they were planning for a ceasefire. He wanted to see substantial de-escalation, were the words that were quoted back to us. And immediately Netanyahu went public and said that they were going to finish the job militarily. And that appeared to be an extraordinary rebuff of the president. But in fact, it was reaching those last-minute agreements, Egypt and Hamas, Netanyahu, figuring out, and finally it came together today. And within those last couple of hours, it was all touch and go until they knew it. And they also, of course, were taking a lot of heat from the UN with a surprise move by the French at the last minute with a resolution that they thought could have been really counterproductive. So there was a lot in play, and they're a bit defensive, according to the person familiar whom I spoke with, but they believe that the outcome is exactly what they needed. And now, of course, Secretary Blinken going, and the real hard work to try to make sure this doesn't happen immediately again, because Netanyahu now has 70% of support. 80% were some Israelis were telling me today, but 70% at least polling support not to end the ceasefire. And so they have to prove to the Israelis this won't happen again, and they have to prove to the people of Gaza that this destruction, the terrible tragedy, the humanitarian disaster there can be remediated with U.S. help and regional help, and that's what Blinken's job is.